sport has always been my thing. It's how I've always gotten my external validation. It's how I've always gotten my internal validation in terms of how I'm feeling about myself. It's given me trophies and awards and friends and all this stuff. And at a certain point, you have to understand that that stuff is good, but it can interfere with your ability to actually be present with your passion. And so decoupling that identity from the act itself, I think is an enormously valuable thing, that I've learned this year.
Hi everyone, today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dylan Bowman. But before we get into the podcast, I'd like to take a moment to thank the traditional custodians upon the lands which this podcast was recorded. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders, past and present. Dylan Bowman is both a phenomenal friend and a phenomenal athlete. I've learned a lot from Dylan, and I hope throughout this conversation you can take something from it and apply it to your own life as well. It's not entirely centered around running and how to become a better athlete. We certainly touch on that, but we also touch on other topics such as training your emotional fitness, internal and external validation, and what passion versus identity looks like for Dylan. We also talk about the importance of simply talking to other people and getting things out there. This is largely what this conversation is trying to promote, preserving the art of conversation and making sure that we use this medium to stay connected to other people. I really hope that you enjoy this conversation with Dylan. If you do, please share it with a friend. Let us know what you think. Reach out, start a conversation with us, or just start a conversation with a friend about this podcast. So, I hope you enjoy it, and my name's Myal Backhausen, and this is Stokely, a creative endeavour to ensure that we continue to connect, listen, learn, and evolve through the art of conversation.
After TNF 50 miler, did your ankle get aggravated at all and swell up or anything, or?
Kind of they've just been sort of unstable and unreliable for a while. And I did roll my right ankle in the race, which was very frustrating. And, based on the fact that I didn't have a lot of strength or stability in the lower leg anyway, I wasn't running on the best set of wheels. And so after the race, I definitely felt some discomfort there, but it's just a matter of getting the strength back and the proprioception back. They're just, ankles are so complicated, and understanding where you are in space, and when you don't trust your feet, it's you can't run, especially downhill. So
Yeah, man, I don't know if you saw the photo I put up about my ankle that I busted. Oh man, it's just I totally understand that whole just lacking confidence for where you put your foot. It's almost strange when you're going through the process of rebuilding your confidence, because you're what? You take it for granted, hey?
Yeah, no, 100%. And when I did my right foot in Chamonix in 2013, that's always been a vulnerability of mine. Even though I obviously was able to bounce back and have several good years of racing afterwards, my right foot has always been a little bit of a vulnerability, just because my ankle has always felt a little unstable after that major injury. And then when you do the opposite ankle also, then you sort of have 2 feet that are compromised, and for 5 years I think built up sort of a confidence in my left foot and kind of compensated for my right foot. But now that both ankles have been sort of injured, it's hard to have confidence in either of them.
How do you deal with that? Because on paper, that has got to be the worst thing that can happen to an athlete just before a race. Out in Chamonix, considered the the unofficial world champs of ultra running, like as far as I'm concerned, mountain ultra running. And then you like just before the race, you bust yourself up and you can't race this race you've been training for. Like, how do you even deal with that?
Well, I mean, obviously it was heartbreaking at the time. It was early in my career. I think I was 26 at the time, 27 maybe. It was my first international race, and my first time ever in Europe. And I was obviously really excited to do the event. I had done Western States earlier in the summer, and was sort of on this improvement trajectory in the sport where, I was accumulating good results. I was starting to make a name for myself. I was starting to get decent support as an athlete, and UTMB in 2013, it was a much smaller race than it is now, but it was still a world class event on the circuit. And at that point in my career, I sort of arrived with eyes wide open. I'd never been to a place like that. And obviously, as you know, when you come into the Chamonix Valley for the first time, it's sort of like, holy smokes, this is the most amazing place in the world. And of course, as a result, you want to go out and start playing in the mountains as soon as possible. And uh, for me, you know, basically what happened was the first day, the first run that I went on after arriving in Chamonix, I blew the ankle out right at the top of the Brevant, and had to take the tram down off the top, and was totally resolved to do the race, even though my ankle was clearly busted. I went back to the hotel. The people there were incredibly nice to me and encouraged me to go to the hospital, which was just down the street. Of course, I said, "Oh, I don't need to go to the hospital. Like, I just twisted my ankle." And they, having seen how hideous it looked, they were like, "No, dude, you're in Europe. You can go to the hospital here, and it's it's not going to bankrupt you." So I went to the hospital, and the doctor, in no uncertain terms, told me that I was not going to be running the race. And I said, "You don't understand. Like, I'm going to run the race." Um, and then, after a few days of hobbling around town, it became clear that that wasn't going to happen. So it was an inauspicious and disappointing start to international racing in my career. Um, but in the long term, it has been a valuable thing for me, because it was what sort of motivated me to get in touch with Jason Koop, who's now coached me since that injury. Um, so with hindsight, and with some perspective, I can see the value in it. But at the time, it was hugely disappointing for a young, ambitious runner on his first international race experience.
Dude, you absolutely nailed it. I mean, at least you got a good story out of it. Um, it's it's funny how you say like it's now valuable because it's not unknown that so many things in the moment that seem horrible to us and something that almost seems unfair and in many ways because of our attachments and whatnot we suffer through them in that point in time, but then once we look back on it we learn that what they do give us over time is like so valuable. So the moments of real pain and suffering can actually turn out to be like the best things that happen to us.
Yeah, and with this experience in particular, it was really interesting because I ended up, as a result of my inability to start the race, I ended up riding around with Joe Grant, crewing for Anton Krupicka throughout the course of UTMB that year. And he was running near the front of the race the entire time. He ultimately dropped out at Triant that year. So I sort of had a front row seat to seeing somebody who was at the most competitive end of the elite field at UTMB, and then also a front row seat of seeing that athlete, kind of have an implosion of energy and ultimately have the disappointment of dropping out of the race. And it was through that experience that I learned, like, oh man, I'm actually kind of lucky that this injury happened. Of course, I didn't really think about it that way at the time, but what I did understand was that if I had been healthy enough to run the race, I was totally unprepared for what UTMB is and was at that time, just because I was living in the Bay Area. I didn't understand, the gravity and the difficulty of the environment there, and so having that front row seat as an injured spectator made me realize, oh wow, if I were to have started this race, I was almost certainly not going to be having a good performance based on the fact that I had clearly seen that I was underprepared. And also, um, yeah, like it also just gave me more, I guess, uh, inspiration, motivation to do what's necessary to actually train for those races. And that's when I got connected with my coach, started really thinking about the appropriate ways to train. And then, after a few years of seeing improvement just from increased experience in the sport, once I got connected with my coach, it was like my career launched on this improvement trajectory that I hadn't seen before in any sport, as a lifetime athlete. And so, the experience of the injury was really the thing that sort of led to all this. So, yeah, to answer your question, yeah, it takes some time to understand the value of those experiences, but uh, that value inevitably makes itself known. And so now with this current bit of adversity I've been going through, I'm just waiting for all that to become clear, but I'm starting to see the outlines of it and understand the lesson in this new form of difficulty I've been going through this year.
Yeah, man. A huge part of me wishes that we could drop back in time and see young Dylan just hammering through Chamonix, like all the way to Lazouche, and just like that young Dylan absolutely going for it in the 2013 UTMB. Would just, like we would have such good laughs about it right now.
Totally. I'd probably at Courmayeur be absolutely blown and would catch a bus ride back through the tunnel and fly home having learned a different difficult lesson. But yeah,
Uh,
that was a really important moment in my career because I was traveling solo. Um, the first year that Xavier won the race, and he was a little known athlete at the time. In the field was Anton Krupicka, Julien Choyer, Sebastian Chagnon, Miguel Heras, who finished second that year. So it was really interesting, and it gave me an appreciation for that event. And yeah, now 6 years later, the race is even cooler, even better, even bigger. I've got one finish there in the big course. I've done TDS, I've done OCC, and it's the highlight of every year going back.
yeah, it's a pretty magical place when it kicks off. I mean, what they've done there is, not short of growing an empire, but it certainly is like something on the calendar which brings the core community and just this enormous extended community of trail and mountain running together. It's pretty sweet. Like
Yeah.
I think it's interesting you named a couple of the couple of guys that were in that race. Like obviously there was an insane women's race going on at the same time. There's no doubt about that.
Hmm.
But like it's interesting because out of those guys that you mentioned, Xavier is still he's still one of the ones that's racing. What's going on now, like 6 years later, and I guess um, for you and your running, I've always looked at you as, and we've spoken so much about this, how you're a smart runner. Like you're really intentional in the way that you go about training, the way that you go about racing. Like it's actually a thought process that you do, and I think it speaks a lot about your character and the person you are because I I see it a lot, and I'm probably um, I'm sure you do as well. How so many athletes can be really reactive in their decisions, and it kind of sounds you have to be in the sport to understand that. Like people reactively choose to run 100Ks just kind of off a, oh, they had a bad race, so I'm going to jump into to do 100Ks. To the rest of the world, that would seem just ludicrous, because who just goes and runs 100Ks off a whim? But I feel like for you, there's definitely a thought process that you go through every time you think about actually signing up and committing yourself to a race, and out of respect to yourself, probably your coach, and also the race organization as well. Like, so do you have a set out process, or like what is your commitment to that whole process that allows you to do what you do and do it successfully? Because I think it's something that a lot of people could learn from, and it's obviously helped you out a lot.
Yeah. So this is something that I feel like I have always been good about, and I think it's not any inherent skill that I have. It's more just the fact that I put a lot of thought into it. And the most important thing for me are two things. Number one, actually listening to like what actually motivates me, whether it's the level of competition of a race, the destination of the race, the type of course that it is, the distance of the race. All those things sort of speak to you on some level when it comes to your selection of the competitions that you want to do when you're sort of building your calendar throughout the year. And then, so motivation is number one. And number two is just, will I be able to train for it appropriately? So, and this goes back to the lesson that I sort of learned at UTMB 2013. It was like, oh, now I understand that you can't train for UTMB, at least for the performance that I would want to achieve there, while living and training in Marin County, California. And that's the reason why in subsequent years I've gone to Colorado to train in the summer times to get ready for mountain races. So understanding the demands of the race and training specifically for them is really important to me. And that's why I'm willing to travel to do sort of training camps to achieve that. So, with Hard Rock this year, my plan is to go back to Colorado again to do some training in the mountains there, because living in Oregon now, it's impossible to achieve that specificity and train appropriately for the demands of that event. And then, yeah, the motivation piece, those are the two most important things for me. And I think I've always been good at planning a year out that includes a lot of rest, so oftentimes I'll only race 3, 4, maybe 5 times a year, so they're all spaced out. And there's usually some kind of progression that's pretty obvious, sort of like an early season race. So, for example, like 2018, start at Tarawera, which is a 100-kilometer race, but it's sort of a more gentle course, a really good race to start the season off. Obviously, a wonderful place to travel to with easy jet lag when you live on the west coast of the US. These are all things that you sort of have to think about. And then, the next progression.
Radical crew as well. Don't forget about that, man.
Radical crew, exactly. Yeah, that's the most important thing. And then, yeah, UTMF after that, also with a radical crew. So, you sort of want to build these calendars in a way that has strategy behind them, right? So you want to be able to train specifically for a race that really motivates you, then have time to rest after that race so that you have the motivation necessary to then dive into the training that is necessary for the following event that you have on your calendar. But, I think it's important to also mention, like, I have also reacted, or acted reactively, as you said, in a way that has damaged my career just this year, just because, and this goes back to sort of some of the lessons that I've garnered from this period of hardship is, I just felt like I was obligated to, you know, get back into racing at a point when my body and mind were clearly telling me, like, no, this is not a time for you to compete. And when you ignore those signals and you do just behave reactively, just based on either expectations of yourself or perceived external expectations from other people, then you end up signing up for races and that you're not prepared for, and having performances that you're not proud of. So, I haven't been perfect in my career. That's for sure. I think I have been pretty good at being thoughtful. but we all fall prey to either temptations or just like an internal pressure on yourself that's unintelligent.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, being able to somehow tap into that internal intelligence and, lack of a better word, intuition about what feels right for you is a pretty big thing. Um, like, what's your experience with understanding that more and more as time goes on for you? Like, do you intentionally kind of focus on trying to understand what feels right for you as opposed to what, just what you think may be right or what looks better on paper?
100%. Yeah. And this is something that my coach has drilled into me whenever we talk about race selection and things like that is, what actually motivates you, because the sport is hard enough as it is, to where if your motivations aren't pure or positive, then the sport is challenging enough to where it becomes much easier to find excuses, why you can drop out of the race or why you're not going to have the performance that you want. So, when you match your motivation with the races that you select, and you have that deep internal desire to like put yourself through what's necessary to achieve what you want to achieve, that's when you have your best races, right? That's like when I have the races that I'm most proud of, not necessarily when I'm really at my fittest, but when I have like positive motivations, maybe for reasons that I can't really explain. And, you know, understanding that that motivation, even if it's mysterious, is an important thing to listen to. And as I've gotten older and more experienced in the sport, that's absolutely like the number one thing that I consider when I'm starting to think about where I want to compete is, just when you look at a calendar or you start looking at races and looking at their elevation profiles and, where they exist around the world, places where you might want to visit. Yeah, sometimes you just get a feeling, right? You just get a feeling of like, oh, that I really want to do that, even if you don't understand why that is. So that's something that I encourage people to really try and get in touch with. Understand what your motivations are, and even if you can't really explain them to people, trust them, and then act accordingly because that's where you have your best performances.
Yeah, man, that's some Yoda advice. I think it's something that, I mean, for me, when I look and go through the process of training for ultras and running ultras, I especially like, on a race, it's almost like it's been said before, but it's like this huge, like, condensed, um it's like a snapshot of life in many ways, like you go through so many emotions and you go through so many like physical sensations as well, during, for instance, say like 100K or 100 miler. And I think the process you go through of understanding your motivations to sign up to whatever race it may be, I think like if you could apply that process and if you could like honestly give that time to um, understand and feel what is right for you in the bigger scale of life, then I feel like so many people would be on different paths in terms of doing what they do for just work and doing what they do for, you know, busting out some creative flair.
Yeah. No, it's interesting you mentioned this because I was having a conversation yesterday with a guy, local runner here in Portland named Yassine Daboon. I don't know if you know him, but great
Legend.
guy, a guy I've known for 10 years. And yeah, just an amazing person, much like yourself, who's just got a great attitude and a great outlook on things. And it's so true. Like, we all just want our life's work to have an impact, right? Like, we don't want it to be a pointless thing, you know? And sometimes, um, it's the temptation is to yeah, just take the easy path, take the promotion that would give you more money even though you hate your job, and you understand that this isn't going to ultimately satisfy a deeper need in yourself. And but at the same time, it's dangerous to, like, as an athlete specifically, something that all pro athletes go through is like seeing yourself get worse or start getting injured or not being the same that you were, when you were younger, and then balancing that with like wanting to follow your passion and have an impact. And so one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently, with hopefully still many more years of solid competition, is like how cool it is that at some point in the future I'll get to kind of like reinvent who I am, like, because I've always been an athlete, and at some point, inevitably that part of my livelihood is going to end, even though I'll always want to be active, always want to compete and be around the sport and generally just be part of the community. At some point, you sort of have to reinvent who you are, and it's kind of a cool opportunity, to in the middle of your life be able to have that reinvention and find something else that's going to have an impact. And even if it's, I just think the temptation nowadays is to always chase either status or some sort of financial reward. So whether it's some big title or some big raise or just generally having outward metrics of success like wealth and family and whatever, if you're not having an impact with what you're doing, like, it's kind of worthless. And I think internally we all have a feeling of whether or not we're satisfied with what we're doing. And, so that's just something I've been thinking about a lot recently is, with my identity as an athlete, sort of understanding that like it's a fragile thing and being careful with it and using it in a way that will hopefully have an impact. And then also coming to terms with the fact that like that being an athlete, it can't be all of who you are, right? And starting to think about like other ways that you can have an impact, as you evolve as a human being. So
Yeah, I think like, we live in a time where that is so available to people. I mean, traditionally, sport and being an athlete, it's measured upon the metrics of success in terms of this is the race that you do and this is the position or this is the time that you run. And it's pretty like it's a very, very narrow focus on a couple of metrics. And nowadays, like, we can, like, yourself or anyone else in this sport, any other sport or almost any other field of or any other profession, you know with the communication available to us on different platforms and using social media is the biggest one. You're not only just an athlete because you have the ability to show your life in so many other areas. And so someone who, for instance, was a TV presenter back in the day could only ever really be a TV presenter to the public eye.
yeah,
Nowadays, that TV presenter could also have this completely different, well, not completely different, but they could just show so much more of who they are and what they actually really believe in through their social media platforms. And like, you know, knowing you and hearing the way you speak right now about your ability to do something different and something more, like, you're one of those guys that definitely gives back to the community and has a lot to give to the community and teach a lot of people about basically life and also the sport of running. But um yeah, you can have so many different um, avenues of kind of reaching out to people and avenues to create a name for yourself and also to see other success instead of just what you have in your trophy case, for instance. Like, so how do you like, what's your advice to like even a younger athlete about the way they use their social media and things like that? Because it's such a a big thing now, when even when you look at sponsors, like it's not just about your race performances, it's the whole package.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be somebody to give advice on social media, I don't think, just because it's something that doesn't really come naturally to me. Like, I I enjoy, sharing things when I can, and oftentimes, like, I feel as if it's kind of unnatural and a chore, because like I don't know, it's just the type of person I am where it just doesn't come naturally to me to think like, oh, maybe I should share this. Whereas some people have that and they're great at it, and they're able to develop great audiences and have a big impact, like you said. But when it comes to advising younger athletes about how they can get more involved in the sport and how they could potentially make a career out of it, obviously social media is one thing, but the more important thing is becoming part of the community and being somebody that people want to go on runs with basically, to be somebody who yeah, sort of embodies the spirit of the sport, being a nice person, non-judgmental, somebody who practices good sportsmanship, and also is a tough mofo. Those are the types of people that I certainly look up to and admire the most. And um, I was thinking about this the other day about the what advice I would give to younger athletes coming into the sport. And I think the most important thing that I would say, particularly for those who have sort of professional ambitions, is to invest in yourself. To not expect somebody to come offer you a contract because you have won a couple of races, but to give yourself those opportunities, even if it puts you in a difficult financial situation or feels like a stretch. When you take risks and bet on yourself and invest in yourself, uh, I think amazing things happen. So for people who instead of like writing to a shoe brand and saying, "Hey, I'd love to run Transvolcania next year. Can you please send me shoes and buy me a plane ticket?" Instead, buy that plane ticket yourself. Get over to Transvolcania yourself. Even if you have to borrow money from your parents, invest in yourself. Get yourself there, and then have the performance that you think you're capable of, and put yourself out there and give yourself that opportunity. And when you do things like that, I think the universe has a way of kind of rewarding you. And when you have then that opportunity, and you capitalize on it, that's when you can start to sort of develop a career for yourself, and start getting the support that you feel like you deserve and that you want, to make it, as a professional. But yeah, the social media thing I think is really important in this day and age, and something that I think comes naturally to younger people. So my advice would be more along the sort of practical advice, how to be part of the community, how to interact with people at races, and then also to, yeah, just not be afraid to sort of be your own, biggest cheerleader, and to give yourself the opportunity to be successful and not expect it to come from anybody else.
Yeah, and that should be summarized and put on a poster and sent to every kid in every school in the world, because that in no way just applies to being an athlete. Hey, like I think everyone, no matter what they do, no matter if they've never done a sport before, I think they should 100% just start to believe a lot more in what they can do, because n- when you first start off anything, no one has a clue what's going down. There's always this process of learning and educating yourself and making mistakes and rolling your ankle and then just getting back up and using them as like not getting beaten down and not calling them failures, because they're all just lessons and learnings. And I think I mean, just what you said is I mean, it's beautiful, man. Like it's 100% something that, you know, it's almost more important than singing a national anthem at school. It's like, imagine if every kid got up and at the start of the assembly they were like, I believe in myself and I'm going to do the best I can do, and then I'm going to fall down and get back up, because that's what life's about, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think too, like, I've never been somebody who is good with the whole, loving myself sort of thing or having confidence in myself thing. And that's, I think, something that also can sometimes be a default mode for athletes is like you're always kind of comparing yourself to somebody else's results and you're always, there's always something that can be improved. And so there's always sort of a feeling of like, you're sort of struggling to be good enough and it can sort of feel overwhelming or just like you're constantly not good enough. And so that's one of the things that this year I've really come to understand is like I have to be cool with who I am, as a person, outside and independent of who I am as an athlete. And it sounds so simple, but it's like such a profound thing for me who's been an athlete my entire life and who's really almost never been injured, to finally have a year where it just feels like I can't catch a break. You really confronted with that idea of like, well, who am I if this isn't who I am? Like, if I can't win races, like, what am I good for? Like, well, this is this is this is like what I do, and if I can't do this, what am I? So come that's just been a big lesson for me. And as you know, my wife is very into this kind of stuff, and she's been really, really helpful for me to just sort of like find that, you know, understanding of like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm actually cool with who I am, like, and I I am doing my best to have a positive impact and, be somebody that um, is having positive contributions not only to the sport but to the world and my community. But um yeah, like it's I think that's so fundamental to being an athlete is like not being caught up in, the superficial parts of being an athlete, like your results and how quickly you ran a marathon or 10K compared to somebody else. But um to do it for those more pure motivations and to give yourself a little slack when you need it.
Yeah, you know, I've seen it. I know you've seen it. When you get eagle-eyed on a goal and it's a race and it's a result, like, man, some athletes can turn into savage people. Like,
Hmm.
it's it's pretty. I mean, it's like that for anything, you know. Like sometimes there's this incredible motivation to go and get something, be it a possession or a job or a race result, and it absolutely can turn people into being monsters. And I think, um, yeah, I think that a lot of the time, some people reflect back on that and go, "Oh my god, like, what did I become? Like, what was that all about?" But I think there's a lot of, yeah, lack of a better phrase, a lot of like inner work that needs to be done to help people understand what's what they really want to go after, because inherently I don't think anyone is actually evil. And when you are kind of short-sighted in what you're going after sometimes, and you may act in a way that isn't very nice to other people, I think that, like, um again, it's probably just because you don't have a very holistic kind of feeling and understanding about what you're actually doing and your purpose.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
100%.
I I'm just wondering, like, a couple of weeks ago, I received a message off a friend, and it said in the message, it said, "Dylan is giving the most amazing talk right now. You'd be so proud." And I read this message knowing that I think you were up in Canada
Yeah.
and you were giving a speech. And after everything that went down this summer and spending a bit of time with you and things like that, I was like, oh my Lord, what is going down in this you know conference room where Dylan is giving this seminar?
Yeah.
Is he about to become like the next Gandhi? Tell me. I know we've both got a little bit of inner Gandhi in us, but tell me tell me what happened that night, because for me to receive a message over the other side of the world from a friend, um, they obviously saw something, and they must have been pretty moved. So what do you think they were experiencing?
So, first of all, yeah, it was a really, really amazing night. Like, just one of those evenings where you're just sharing it with a bunch of people and you just feel like everybody is sort of feeling the same thing and sort of like in it together. And yeah, just like a really wonderful feeling. But effectively, what it was we did a talk at a theater in North Vancouver with Gary Robbins, who organized the event, and Ellie Greenwood. They should need no introduction. Gary obviously is a legend, Canadian ultra runner. Ellie Greenwood as well, one of the greatest of all time, multiple Western States and Comrades champion, and myself. And all three of us, have had some degree of success. Obviously, Ellie having sort of achieved basically everything you can in the sport as one of the greatest of all times. And also, we've all kind of been through some tough things recently. Gary having uh, missed the finish at Barkley by 6 seconds a couple of years ago and then struggling with injury since then. Ellie basically having not felt good running in like, I think 3 years or so. And myself just struggling with injury this year. And so all of us sort of gave talks in regards to dealing with setback and injury and things like that. And neither of us, or I should say, yeah, none of us knew the content of each other's presentations. And I was fearful that there would just be a lot of overlap, I was injured, I did this, this was the lesson sort of thing. But all of our presentations were very, very different. And without giving away what they said, I sort of focused mine on a couple of things. I mean, I obviously sort of just gave a rundown of all the different sort of setbacks I've experienced this year and how just like physically and emotionally crushing they were. But then, like, I sort of had two takeaways for people. And the first was just like focusing on this concept that we've sort of already been talking about of developing your emotional fitness, in conjunction with your physical fitness, and how important that part of it is, to not only being a great athlete, but to being somebody who's a whole and happy and, uh, you know, good, satisfied person. Um, so I talked a lot about sort of how I've been focusing on the emotional fitness component. And then the second thing I talking about is, again, we've sort of mentioned it here, but this concept of like your passion versus your identity, and having the ability to sort of decouple the your feeling of how you feel about yourself as a person from these superficial things that we get from running, whether it's trophies or awards or like podcast interviews or all these sort of like superficial things that come from it. And I used a passage from my father-in-law's book, um, where he talks about his own experience being a piano player and a moment in time where he had an epiphany that he was playing because his family wanted him to, and that people liked listening to him play and told him he was a good piano player, not because he loved it. And then when he got back to that feeling of like, I'm playing the piano because it's what I love to do, then he he was able to then reemerge and sort of redevelop himself as an artist. And I've sort of like when I read the passage in his book, I just like had to put it down because I was like, this is exactly the thing for me. It's like sport has always been my thing. It's how I've always gotten my external validation. It's how I've always gotten my internal validation in terms of how I'm feeling about myself. It's given me trophies and awards and friends and all this stuff. And at a certain point, you have to understand that that stuff is good, but it can interfere with your ability to actually be present with your passion. And so decoupling that identity from the act itself, I think is an enormously valuable thing, that I've learned this year. So that was the general gist of my talk. I think we're going to actually do it again in Seattle in February of next year, where we'll each probably give similar talks to last time. But it was a really, really powerful night. Ellie gave an amazing talk. Gary talked as well about his disappointments at Barkley and other things he's been through in life. Um, and it just made me think again, just like what a great community in sport this is, where I can stand in front of 500 people and just like be totally open and honest and, vulnerable without being embarrassed at all, and it's a great feeling. So it was a super special night. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. I feel like I've been subjected to somewhat of that energy right now. That's good. Do you, good on you, man. Just like straight out, good on you for being that way in terms of your openness and being able to start to understand that value in in all of those things, because I think it's so important to continually work on that. Um, yeah, that emotional intelligence and believing that your own emotional intelligence is so profound, and it's so it is so real. It's a real thing, and I don't think it gets enough attention, and it definitely doesn't get the respect it deserves because
And I think it's important to also say that it's trainable. It's like we put all this emphasis on our physical fitness and our physical training. And this emotional fitness thing is something that's also trainable if you give it the appropriate emphasis and you give it the time and you seek help, whether it's therapy or like going to community activities or, you know, bringing other people into whatever practice you have going on. Like it's something that's trainable and focus and putting it in the lens of the emotional fitness and something that you work on and you train for, I think is a good way for athletes to kind of um, understand it and to appropriately emphasize it in their lives.
so what is it that you're currently doing to in terms of your training for that aspect of your life?
I mean, a lot of different things, but the most I guess the easiest things to sort of mention are the obvious, the daily meditation, the giving yourself a moment to sort of come back to balance. We have this tendency to just always be wanting to push, 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 and instead giving yourself a time to come back into yourself and to actually, um, yeah, just like recharge and reset and rebalance. Because it's just like again, it's sort of like that motivation thing that I mentioned earlier, where like it's hard to understand like when why you feel it, but when you feel like you're in balance, like you kind of know it, and then all the rest of your life sort of falls into place. So the meditation thing has been enormous for me, and again, I just focus on just bringing myself back into balance. So whatever actions or activities are pulling me in different directions to just come back. And then the second, therapy has been a big thing for me this year, something that I had never really done in my life, but just having the opportunity to talk to people, and just kind of get things out, I think is incredibly important. And and valuable. And just, I think the other thing is just being open about it, and just being willing to talk about it, I think helps me a lot. Um, and then, yeah, watching yourself, like, how are you talking to yourself internally? And like, what words are you putting out into the environment? And how are those impacting you? And who are the people that you're surrounding yourselves with? All those things, I think, go into your emotional fitness, because if you're constantly hanging out with people who are really negative, or you're constantly saying things to yourself that are really negative, I think those things have a tendency to manifest themselves physically in a way that's negative to your overall, um, happiness and health as a human being. So yeah, those are sort of the things that I focus on: the meditation, therapy, talking it out with people, and yeah, just like watching that internal and external dialogue and the people that I surround myself with.
Yeah, I think that's a. I mean, thanks for sharing that, man. It's not easy to. It's becoming more easy. It's definitely becoming more common, and it's definitely becoming more accepted, I think, in our kind of societies, especially. Um, you know, you and I have spoken at lengths about how we were both very much lads back in the day. Um,
Yeah, very much.
we can still definitely have a laddish time. There's no
Yeah.
doubt about that. But I think, you know, back when you and I were both a lot younger, we we would definitely do a fair bit of swilling, and it would definitely lead to a lot of yeah, the kind of the typical way that, you know, you grow up going through high school and college, and just geez, I mean, like, the focus was honestly about crushing as many beers as you can, having as many late nights as you can, and obviously chasing as many ladies as you can. We've come a long way from those days, um, which is so interesting, because our friendship has never been about that, and um, and that's been different, because a lot of my friendships, more than not, have been a result of just getting hammered, having great times, and then doing that rinsing and repeating over and over and over again. But
Yeah.
I think to what I'm trying to say here is that it really, what you just said about being open and being honest and having that healthy internal dialogue, that whole concept, that wouldn't really have been accepted as well as it is now, you know. Like, it's a different time, and for a guy like of your age and of your stature to to be open about your, like, internal feelings and how you go about managing them is like, it's so it's so pleasantly received nowadays, and I think that's a huge sign of the times. Like,
Yeah, no, I think 100%. And I think the reason I do like to talk about this type of stuff, not only does it sort of make me feel better, but I feel like it's sort of an obligation, to sort of speak honestly about the shit that you go through. I think people have these ideas of, like, professional athletes as having just these amazing lives, that were just like everything's easy, and like you just post on Instagram and run all day and then you take a nap and everything's great. But like, it's a hard way to make a living, and like, you really, we're pushing ourselves, basically as hard as we possibly can. And um for me, as somebody who's really never dealt with a lot of injury, and certainly has had a very easy life compared to most people in the world, I feel like it's my obligation to sort of share, like, you know, things aren't easy sometimes, even when they appear to be on the internet, And even though I do have a great life, I wouldn't trade it for the world. Like, we go through shit too. And that's something that I've really come to appreciate this year, is like talking to friends of mine who've been through similar stuff. Also, kind of at moments where it seems like there's no reason for it, because that's kind of how I felt. Is like I really didn't have any reason to fall into this like hole that I fell into last year. And sometimes it's we don't understand why it happens, and it can happen independent of all the external inputs that would theoretically make you happy. And so, for me, like coming off 2018 where I had a great season and then just kind of like falling into this hole for no particular reason, talking about it honestly helps me to sort of think through it, and it helps me to connect with people who've been through things that are similar, and hopefully it helps people who are going through things that are similar or who have gone through similar things understand that there's nothing wrong with them, that it's something that impacts everybody and we don't really know why, but it's just part of being human, and accepting your humanity I think is something that's hard to do for athletes sometimes, because we constantly prove to ourselves that we're we're superhuman. We're constantly just achieving these amazing things and putting ourselves through such hard stuff and coming through the backside having finished, and oftentimes being really really proud of ourselves. But it comes at a cost, and sometimes we have to be taught that we're human, and if we don't have that appreciation ourselves. um, so that's sort of the approach that I've taken with you know being open about this type of stuff, because I think it really is my responsibility to be that way.
Yeah, I think I don't know exactly know who coined the phrase, like only a surfer knows the feeling, but I believe that can definitely be applied to almost every sport. Um,
Totally, totally.
and and I think on a larger scale too, to touch on what you just said about um, sharing it and being open, and like it's connecting to people, and I think more and more I continually hear how important that is, to be able to just connect to others, because so many people um, are so lonely in this world, despite the plethora of ways we can connect. There's so many apps that you can link to new people and etc etc, but in so many ways we're still so like we become more disconnected. And a huge thing for me in wanting to be able to like you know kick off this this whole podcast is to just like connect again, because having conversations like with people that I know and also strangers about things that I may be educated in, and I also especially things that I'm not educated in, fills me with fills me with this like energy of like, yes, like I love having conversations with people, and I love learning new things, and I want to make that more common. Like I want people to understand that if we lose that art of conversation and we don't converse with people in this way, then that's like it's kind of like writing a letter. People used to write letters to each other and that's the way they communicated. But now who's writing letters anymore? It's like it's an art that's been lost in the world. You know, I hear stories about some kids that don't even know how to write, and like some adults even like they don't even know the last time they picked up a pen to write something down. And I think like, damn, are we honestly facing a situation where the more traditional ways of communicating with each other are dying out, such as having a good old conversation?
No, 100%. And I think you and I share this, and that we love to just kind of like talk, just sort of like whether it's about life or the sport or, any number of things. It just is therapeutic to be able to talk. And I think that's why people go to therapy, obviously. And I think it's why that event in Vancouver had such a powerful feeling for the people that were there. Is like, we, yeah, like we have the opportunity to connect with each other on social media, but like if this talk that we all gave was virtual, it wouldn't have had the same impact. But nowadays it's hard to or it's unusual to get into a room with a whole bunch of people and be open and honest and like develop a connection with those people. And I think that's something that we need as human beings. And when we feel it, we understand that this is fundamental to who we are. And that's why I feel like there was just this buzz in that theater that night. It was just like, we're all in this together. Like we're all connected here. And, you know, is not a zero sum thing. You know, if Gary has a great race, it doesn't mean that I'm less of an athlete, right? And vice versa. Um, and I think that is just, again, something that is like so critical to being human, is like to have these connections. And nowadays, you know, it's so easy for everything to be virtual, and, you know, to have internet friends who you never meet personally and you never talk to, you know, whether it's via Skype or in person. Um, and there's something that's lost there, you know. And so even though you have increased connection, it's not the same connection. It's not a deep connection, you know. And so that's why I think we really do need to go out of our way to you know, yeah, do that stuff that you mentioned, you know, be connected, have conversations with people, be open and honest, and just like, yeah, not put up walls. um so yeah, I mean, good on you for the podcast.
You've you've definitely also put yourself in some situations where it in some environments, I should say, that are probably pretty challenging to enter into. And particularly what I'm thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, but so you do the marathon project, or you have done in the past a marathon project with the prison, and I think it's what is it, the San Antonio or something?
It's San Quentin. Yeah.
San Quentin. So you go and do this running program within the prison there, and from an outsider's point of view on that, I imagine that's a pretty challenging environment to walk into and communicate with these people. So how do you go about breaking down a barrier like that?
You know, it's actually shockingly not difficult to connect with these people. And that's what I think is so important about it, is it really gives you an understanding of your own humanity and the threads that sort of tie us together or that make us human. You know, in a lot of cases, the guys who I know who are in prison are generally really great people, and they happen to make an, a series or at least one enormous mistake in their life. And no matter how regretful they are, no matter how much they've changed, they can't take it back, and they're being punished. And in a lot of cases, you know, they've got victims, and that's something that you have to respect and appreciate. But at the same time, when you go into prison and you interact with these people, you understand that they're people, you know. And you know, if it weren't for the super easy upbringing that I had as a kid, with every privilege you could ever imagine, being born in, you know, the United States in the 80s, and being a white person and a male and coming from a good family, like most of these people didn't have it teed up in life like I did, you know. And if I grew up in different in their circumstances, who's to say where I would be? You know, there's a good chance that I could end up in prison. And no matter what people say, if they say, "Oh, I'd never, you know, be capable of doing what that person did," you know, no matter what it is, those people are lying to themselves. And you only need to go into prison a couple of times and interact with these people to understand that they're people, you know. And in the US, at least, like, they're 90% of people who go into prison end up coming out eventually, and have to then reintegrate into society. And you know, the way the prison system is set up, it's set up to just put people away warehouse them for however long their sentence is, and then just let them go. And so for me, the important thing is to understand that this is part of living in a civilization, right? Like people make big mistakes and they should be held accountable for those mistakes. But at the same time, we have to be human and we have to be able to give them the tools that it'll take to change because 90% of them are going to come back out. So it's our obligation, it's our responsibility to not treat these people like they're irredeemable, but to understand that they're human and that with different circumstances and um, different luck in life, you could be in their position too, and then you'd be relying on other people's help also. So um, yeah, it's been an enormously powerful thing for me. It's definitely the thing I miss most about living in California is being part of that group. And I'm actively trying to figure out ways that I can get back involved with something similar here in Oregon. Um, but yeah, it's a really great thing. And there should be a film coming out in 2020 about the San Quentin Running Club. And I'll be sure to share it online when it does come out.
Yeah, man, definitely. Let us know how we can help promote that. That's yeah, good on you for stepping into that space and being there to I don't know, make a difference really, because I'm sure that they, as much as you get out of it, they get out of it too. It's kind of
Oh, yeah, I mean, 100%. It definitely goes both ways. They really appreciate that we go in there, and at the same time, we absolutely love, being able to help and seeing them improve and feeling their appreciation and feeling that connection. Again, it's the same thing. It's the same thing as you feel when you go to a group run with your buddies, on a Saturday morning. That's how we feel on Monday night when we go in. It's a group run with our buddies and we're connecting, and it's the same feeling. You're just inside a prison.
yeah, it's funny that look, you can even just take it to running along any given trail, and you're running up near like, and you're about to pass someone on the trail, and you, there's a point nowadays where you make a decision over like, wow, do I say hello to this person or do I not? Like, like what's the environment I'm in? Like, where am I? How close to the city am I? Like, and there's this like a moment of thought of like, what do I do? And it's so often, I've got to the point now where regardless, I say hello. And even if I get no reply, it's totally fine. But even just to run on the trail and to say hello to a stranger, it's just the energy in your run just is just uplifted. It feels so much nicer. And I think like, yeah, I just think that I know you're an advocate for it and I'm definitely an advocate for it. But yeah, just like breaking down those small barriers is so important. And I think you must have had to make that choice of signing up to that program and getting involved. So, like, good on you for doing that. And yeah, I hope you can take that worldwide. Hopefully, when the movie comes out, people get a bit inspired, mate. Is that
Yeah.
do you? So you spoke, to kind of bring it all back to, the ability and the power to reinvent yourself. Do you have thoughts on what that might look like for you in the next say 5 or 10 years?
The short answer is no, but it's something that I now think about a lot. I think I've always just taken my health for granted and expected that I was going to have this super long, successful career as an athlete. And now I understand just like how fragile it is and how being a one-dimensional person is just terrible. But what I do know is that the thing that I love in this world is sport. It's always been the thing that I've gravitated towards. Some people love music, some people love fashion, some people know they want to be doctors when they're kids. Like for me, I always wanted to be an athlete. I've always loved sport. It's where I've always felt my best and felt my most fulfilled. So that's not going to change no matter whether I'm an athlete or not. So, what I do know is that I want to be involved in sport to some degree, and obviously ultra running is where I have devoted the last 10 years of my life, and I anticipate devoting many more years of my life. So, whether it's doing some coaching or podcasting or maybe helping brands with sports marketing, things like that. I think I'd really love to do, scouting, identifying good young athletes, supporting those young athletes, helping them to be successful. I think that's something where I would find a lot of joy and satisfaction. So something in the world of sport, I know that's what I want to be doing, but it'll give me an opportunity to have an impact, but a different impact, and that I think will be equally fulfilling and equally motivating to me. When I ultimately do sort of age out of my career of being a professional racer.
Yeah, and I don't want to like make it seem like that is any time soon, because I know you and your ability. I know your passion. I think everyone else now has a bit more of an understanding about what motivates you and how dedicated you are. So like that's not any time in the near future, that's for sure. There's many mountain passes to cross over in a race scenario before any time like that dawns. That's for sure.
I hope so.
But bro, it's so great to get your perspective on life more so than anything else, because I think so many people can learn from yourself. You're a great dude, and yeah, dude, let's touch base again soon, because when time gets in the way of good conversation, it's a bit of a shame sometimes. So let's make sure we catch up again pretty soon.
Mael, thanks so much for the convo. I love you, bro. You're always a joy to chat with, and I always love all the time we spend together. And you've given me a ton in my career too, man. You've helped me so much, and I appreciate you. I appreciate you deeply.
Thanks, man. It goes both ways. I love you too. Say hi to the fam for me. Tell Millie I miss her, and yeah, let's touch base again soon, all right?
All right, bro.
Ciao.
See ya.
So there we have it, everyone. A conversation with the great Dylan Bowman. Now, we really just hope that this sparks conversation within your own life. We really hope that this podcast helps encourages more conversation, and it helps preserve the art of conversation. So if you could help us out and share this with a friend, or just reach out and let us know what you think. Drop us a comment, write us a review, whatever's easiest for you. We'd really appreciate you taking the time. Just like we really appreciate you taking the time to listen today. And if you want to find out more about Dylan or get in touch with Dylan, you can hit him up on his website, which is dylanbowman.com. He's also on Facebook, or you can find him on Twitter or Instagram at dylanbow. So again, thank you, and let us know what you think. Hope you have a great day, and take it easy.
Hey Debo, are you there?
Did we crush it?
That was sick, man. You're a legend at this thing.
My name's Mael Backhausen, and this is Stokely, a creative endeavour to ensure that we continue to connect, listen, learn, and evolve through the art of conversation.